welcome to this press conference. And that's why...
So let me just say that this is a very interesting event, because if you remember, we started off having a press conference here, then we moved off stage into a virtual press conference. Now we are back, I think, for the first time with a physical press interview, not quite a press conference. And it has been almost a year, or it's been a year by now. Our first imported case happened on the 23rd of January. The day before that, we set up the multi-ministry task force to tackle this, because we were anticipating that sooner or later the case would come to Singapore. But little did we know that we only had 1 day advance preparation. The next day, the first case arrived. And ever since then, this National Press Center has more or less become our second home. We come here regularly for press conference to discuss with the media, to brief the media of the developments. And now it has been a year. Looking back, we have come a long way. I want to take this opportunity to thank every Singaporean for their support, their understanding, and their cooperation. With all their efforts together, we are able to manage the crisis and keep the number of cases, especially the local community cases, low, and allow us to progress into phase 3 of the opening. But like what Lawrence always said, we are not at the end of the tunnel yet. The war is not yet over. We need to continue to remain vigilant. And we have gone through this process. We have learned a lot as we went along. In the beginning, we knew very little about the virus. The scientific knowledge was very limited. Research was still ongoing at that point in time. Even now, we still have a very limited knowledge about the virus. We know a lot more, but we still don't know everything about the virus. So we are still discovering new things as we go along. And therefore, we mustn't take things for granted. So we need to continue to remain vigilant. And now that we have been able to ramp up our medical facility, our testing capability, and strengthen our contact tracing ability, and now we are beginning to roll out our vaccination plans. So I think we are well on our way towards a recovery, but still the road is still a very long one, and we still need to bring everyone on board, make sure that we look after one another, take care of one another. What is also very important is for me to thank all our healthcare workers who have worked very hard over this 1 year. They're still continuing to work very hard, because now that phase 3 has been opened, they not only need to continue to stand ready to deal with the crisis from COVID-19, they also have to deal with the usual patients and keeping Singaporeans healthy, as well as helping patients to recover and treat patients. So on one hand, they need to continue with their usual daily healthcare needs. At the same time, they still need to remain vigilant to prepare for possible new waves of infection that may come our way. So I think I want to thank all the healthcare workers for their efforts. And healthcare workers are not the only one that are working hard. We also want to acknowledge many Singaporeans who have stepped forward, both individual volunteers as well as private sector companies, institutions, and the NGOs who have stood forward and participated in our efforts in tackling COVID-19. And many of them have contributed towards the effort. And quite a large number of them have shown their support and encouragement to our healthcare workers. I've seen many who have donated food, distributed care packs, and different things, as well as penned encouraging messages for our healthcare workers. And these gestures are very important encouragement to our healthcare team as they continue their work to fight this COVID-19. As I said, this crisis probably reflects that our society as a very resilient people, able to manage and deal with crises as they emerge. And when the challenges come our way, we are able to come together, look after one another, support one another, and to emerge stronger at the end of the crisis. So we do look forward to continuing working with our fellow Singaporeans over the next few months as we roll out our vaccination, as we continue to ramp up our testing scope and capacity, and as we reopen our economy and our society. But at the same time, we have to bear in mind that we are not alone in this world. The rest of the world, we still see a lot of new cases emerging, and regularly we see new records being set. So this is continue to worry us, and therefore we hope that we can work together globally, look at how we can collaborate internationally to ensure that the whole world can emerge from this crisis together. So I think going forward, we will focus a lot on, at least for this year, we will focus a lot on vaccination, rolling out the program, helping Singaporeans to get vaccinated as soon as possible so that we are able to provide protection for our population. Maybe I ask Lawrence to add on.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Good to see everyone here physically, face to face. It's been a year since we, had this fight against COVID-19. I don't think any words can fully describe what 2020 has been like. It's quite surreal to see the world come to a standstill, to see traffic come to a standstill, borders closed. No one would have anticipated these sorts of scenarios when we got into first talked about having to deal with this new virus. So it's really been an exceptional year, challenging, exhausting for everyone. We've had to put in place some very difficult measures in Singapore, unprecedented, and we are very appreciative that Singaporeans have cooperated and taken these measures in their stride. And that's really through the cooperation of everyone working together that has enabled us to get to where we are today. So I want to echo what Minister Gan said just now, to thank all our healthcare and frontline workers who have been working hard round the clock over the whole of last year and are continuing to do so. We've had also many, unsung heroes from across all walks of life doing their parts, and certainly the tremendous spirit of Singaporeans in rallying together, showing appreciation for the essential workers, for the migrant workers, going out of their comfort zone to help people who are in need and there are people who are vulnerable. I think this crisis has certainly brought out the best of Singaporeans, and we can see that in action throughout the past year. We are entering 2021 and this new year with more capabilities in tackling COVID-19, as you heard just now. We have better healthcare capabilities, we have better testing and tracing capabilities, and we are now rolling out vaccinations. So we are in a much stronger position from that point of view. On the other hand, the situation remains highly unpredictable because we also know that the virus is raging everywhere in the world. There are new, more infectious strains out there, may even be circulating in our community. We don't know. And we have seen also community cases creeping up. And it's quite, the reality is there is a sense of fatigue among Singaporeans with all the safe management measures that they have to comply with. That's true everywhere in the world, so it's not unique to Singapore. So from that point of view, if you look at these challenges and concerns, we are still in a vulnerable position. It only takes one super spreader event for new cases to emerge in an uncontrollable fashion. And despite all the precautions we can put, all the measures that we can put, nothing will ever be watertight. So long as there is a lapse, so long as we let our guard down, so long as there is weakness in any line of defense, somebody doesn't take sufficient precaution, feels ill, doesn't see a doctor, you can easily end up with a super spreader event and you can have clusters emerging. And then we will be running around trying to chase after the virus all over again, like what happened at the beginning of last year. So we are trying very hard to prevent that from happening. And our priorities for this year are twofold. Number one, we will have to continue to accelerate our vaccination program. We have already been ramping up and we will go all out to try and get everyone in Singapore vaccinated as soon as possible. Number two, we continue to stay vigilant and we continuously update and review our measures and safeguards. And where necessary, we will make adjustments depending on the situation and depending on how the situation evolves. So we are watching that very carefully. So that in the interim, during this period, until we get the vast majority of people in Singapore vaccinated, we must ensure that our measures at the borders, as well as our community measures, remain tight and effective in keeping the infection under control. Right? So it's, we say this almost repeatedly, so I, at risk of saying this again and again, that it's not over, it's a long fight. Yes, we can see the end in sight because we have a vaccination in place. We have a plan to get everyone vaccinated by the third quarter of this year. But between now and the third quarter of this year, there are many months and many things can happen during this period. So let's stay alert, let's stay vigilant, let's rally together and complete our mission to defeat COVID-19 together.
Maybe I say a few words in Mandarin, just for the Chinese soundbite. 我们记得去年1月23日，我们确诊了第一宗的输入病例，到现在已经有1年了。这过去的1年是一个可以说是漫漫长路，所以走了这一年的脚中呢，当我们回首来时路的时候，我们会感觉到这一年的确是非常艰辛的1年。也不单只是卫生部的辛苦，其实我想全国的人民都面对同样的困难。许多人需要改变他们的生活习惯，有些人甚至他们的生活也受到影响，经济上也面对许多的挑战。所以这一年走来真的是不容易。但是值得我们欣慰的是，我可以看到我们的国人在这个艰难的时刻，在这个有面对危机的时刻，能够团结一致，一起来对抗这个疫情，这是非常难得的。也就是因为我们有这一种合意的一个心智呢，让我们能够上下一心的来全心全意的来对抗这个疫情，使到我们能够有效的把这个疫情控制下来。所以在这里我要感谢我们所有的前线的工作人员，他们在合理的追踪在检测病例在照顾病人方面都不留一例。再加上特别是我们的前线的医药人员，他们也在非常细心的照顾我们的病人，让我们的死亡率可以说是全世界最低的一个国家之一。我在这里要谢谢我们的这些前线工作人员，我们也要谢谢有许多的这个医务人员，无论是机构或者是商业企业还是个人，很多都挺身而出，特别对我们的前线工作人员表示关怀，给他们送食物送礼包鼓励他们这对于我们的工作人员来讲是一个非常重要的一个鼓励，让他们能够知道背后有很大的靠山，能够帮助他们支持他们的继续往前走。当然我们的这个危机还没有完全过去，我们现在目前是在第3阶段的开放当中但是我想我们还是要意识到世界各地每天还有许多新的病例在发生，所以我们不能够松懈，还是继续的要保持安全距离，保持安全的工作场所同时呢，我们在接着下来的几个月会积极的推出 这个疫苗的接种，帮助我们的国人能够获得这个疫苗的接种，借此来保护我们的国人和他们所爱的人。所以这样的话，我们就能够达到保护整个国家，保护我们所有的国人。还是希望新加坡人能够和我们继续的合作，继续的配搭，我们一起来做好这个防疫的工作，让我们能够在这个疫情过后能够变得更坚强，能够变得更团结。
I will say a few words, but you have to bear with me because unlike Min Gan, I have to use a prop for Mandarin. Okay, I'll say a few words in Mandarin and then we can take questions after that. 从我们开始对抗冠状病毒至今已经过了1年，所有国人在这1年里都面对了种种的挑战。在这期间，我们采取了许多严格的措施，所以我们要非常感谢大家的谅解与配合。大家都尽了最大的努力，也做出了牺牲，尤其是我们的医护和前线的工作人员，我们也对他们深表感激。进入对抗冠病的第2年，我们已经更了解病毒，能更有效地检测病毒，也采购了疫苗来控制疫情。不过我们也面对新的挑战，许多国家的疫情情况仍然非常严重，而且还出现了感染力更强的变种病毒。病毒在我们的社区内也继续传播，我们也不时看到新病例出现。国人在遵守安全措施方面也开始感到疲惫，所以我们必须继续保持谨慎，尤其是接下来的几个月，直到大多数国人都注射疫苗为止。跨部门工作小组接下来几个月的主要的工作是加强疫苗接种计划，以保护国人。这包括向人们解释为什么应该注射疫苗，让更多人更方便地注射疫苗。我们将在全岛设立疫苗的注射中心，也会以义工及工作人员帮助年长者预约注射疫苗。与此同时，我们也会继续关注全国和国内的疫情情况，继续调整我们的安全措施。多年来，新加坡坚韧不拔和团结一致的精神，让我们度过许多危机，让我们抱着希望和信心，勇往直前，继续努力对抗病毒，而击败病毒。谢谢。
Thank you, ministers. We will now begin the Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question. When we call you, one of my colleagues, Heiko or Melissa, will pass you the mic for you to ask your question. Please state your name and your media organization before asking your question. Thank you. So we can take the first question. Maybe the gentleman here.
Thank you, ministers. This is Junsen from Today Online. A YouGov survey earlier this month said only 47% of Singaporeans are most likely to take the vaccine.
How many percent?
47. And 34% are on the fence. Other surveys say similar things. Do these numbers alarm you? And what can be done to nip vaccine hesitancy? And what can be done to also combat the mistruths about vaccines?
So I think I acknowledge these numbers, but I look at it as an opportunity for us to really step up our efforts to reach out to them. We can understand the concerns because, after all, this is a new vaccine. And as I explained in Parliament, we do acknowledge that there are unknowns about this vaccine, especially the long-term effects. The shorter-term effects, we know what they are, and we have put in place mitigating measures, precautionary measures, like we will observe them for 30 minutes after they've been injected, so as to ensure that they are well before we release them. So there are measures that we have put in place to ensure that the vaccines can be safely administered. And we continue to monitor vaccine safety and to give people update regularly so as to ensure that this vaccine that we've introduced will be safe and people can accept them. So there is a lot of work for us to do. to convince the rest who are maybe adopting a wait and see attitude, or some may just decide they are not going to get vaccinated. But I would encourage them to consider very carefully, because while today our number of cases are low, so some may have the misperception that it's quite safe, so it really doesn't matter. You don't really need a vaccine. But we must remember that the rest of the world is still burning up. You still have new cases every day and new records being set almost every other day. So it is important for us to remain vigilant and to prepare ourselves so that we are able to withstand new waves of infection if it were to come. Also bear in mind that at some point in time, we do need to open up more in the terms of our community as well as our borders and our economic activities. And vaccination will then help us to get there faster. So therefore, vaccination is very important, notwithstanding that the current number of infections in Singapore is low. So this actually provides us an opportunity to quickly roll out the vaccine, to vaccinate everybody, rather than to wait until the infection has risen and then the number of cases are growing. Then we try to catch up. Then by that time, it may be too late. So it's better for us to do it ahead of time. But it does underscore the need for us to continue our public education programs, to reach out, to explain to people, and to convince people. Particularly the more senior, there are many of them are at home, they don't come out. And many of our senior activities have also been suspended because of precautionary measures that we have to put in place. And therefore, we need to actually probably take the hard way to go house to house, visit the seniors, explain to them, and help them to make the bookings. As Minister Wong mentioned, they do need to make a booking, so it's not easy for the seniors, and we have no choice but to really do it the hard way and to go house to house, person to person, to explain to them, to answer their queries, to reassure them, and to persuade them to go online and to book for the vaccination. And on top of that, of course, PM Min Wong and myself have already taken the vaccine to lead by example that it is safe for us to do so, and we hope that Singaporeans will follow us and also get vaccinated when their turn comes. And on the rumors and falsehoods, I think it is something that I really want the media to help us to reach out to fellow Singaporeans, not to share messages or information that has not been verified. You can always go to MOH to get it verified, to check, and to rely more on our reliable media like yourself, rather than to depend on hearsay, because sometimes it can be very counterproductive. Once you have a false message that gets propagated and people believe in it, it's very difficult to reverse that impression. So I will encourage Singaporeans not to propagate messages that you are not sure that it is true. Don't just send it out because it sounds interesting and it's good to share around, but make sure that whatever you share is verified, is correct, and so that we can act responsibly and help to spread this message of vaccination, encouraging people to get vaccinated as soon as possible.
There's just one point I wanted to highlight on top of what Minister Gan had just said, which is that our philosophy in rolling out the vaccination is to push out whatever supplies of vaccines we get as soon as possible. And that's very important, right? We are not holding back the supply in order to wait for the people who are holding back and say, okay, since you want to hold back, I will reserve some supply for you until you have decided to take up, right? So for those who choose not to take up, it's your choice, but we will roll out and push out the vaccines regardless. And if you want to wait, you must accept the consequence that perhaps if you wait later, if the vaccine supply has been taken up, you may, and you want to take it up later on, you may not have the ready supply. So that's an important point that we want to highlight. We are not trying to hold back or ration the supply. It's not in Singapore's interest to do that. Our interest is to get as many people vaccinated as soon as possible. Each time we get a supply, we push out, we send out the invites, we invite people to book. If the people we invite to book do not wish to book for whatever reasons, despite us going door to door, we will invite another group of people to take it up. And we will do so, at a relatively fast clip in order to ensure that we can push out the vaccines as quickly as possible and get everyone in Singapore vaccinated quickly.
Move on to Zhipeng. Zhipeng raised his hand.
Hi, good afternoon, ministers. This is Zhipeng from Zaobao. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, on the topic of vaccine supply, may we know if we have received the next few shipments of the Pfizer vaccine? And also yesterday, during the vaccination of frontline workers from the aviation sector, SATS mentioned that our authorities are currently looking into AstraZeneca vaccines. So may we know if we also have advanced purchase agreements with the AstraZeneca? And also, may I add one more question? Minister Lawrence, you mentioned in your Facebook post yesterday night that the government is monitoring the recent increase in community cases and is considering if additional measures are necessary. So may we know what additional measures are we considering? Could it be another mini circuit breaker or some sort? Thank you.
You want to go on the vaccine first?
So I'll talk about the vaccine. First, as I explained, because of confidentiality, we can't disclose all the vaccines that we have negotiated with. I've announced 3, and we will have to keep it that way. And as and when we are able to disclose more, we will share with the population. And I've also explained in Parliament that we do receive shipment progressively. The quantities are, we don't receive 100,000 every week. It's not a fixed schedule. We have a very broad schedule that has been worked out between us and the suppliers. And as and when the shipment arrive or they're being shipped, they will inform us, and we are expected to receive them. So we have broad delivery schedules being agreed, and we have received additional shipment over and above what we have announced earlier that we received the first shipment, I think in December. Since then, we have received subsequent shipments. And of course, as mentioned, we have purchased sufficient for the whole of Singapore population from different suppliers. And so far, we are monitoring the shipping delivery. So far, they're generally aligned with what we have expected. So we will progressively roll out more vaccination centers as and when we receive additional shipment.
I said we are monitoring and we are considering. So it's, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, it's a continuous effort. The measures are never static, and we can potentially tighten or we can potentially relax some of them, right? Even during phase 3 itself. So, as I said, we are watching things carefully because we are now seeing a few community cases creeping up. We have our first local cluster after quite a long while. We are doing everything we can to contain and ring fence and isolate these clusters. But the cases we have picked up are an indication that there is the virus is circulating. We've always known that, we've always said that, but now we are seeing these cases popping up, right? Unlike before, right? But we could speculate the reasons. I think potentially one of the reasons would be that after the whole end of year festivities, where lots of people were gathering and out and about, I think quite a number of those sorts of interactions, human interactions, would have contributed to some of the recent cases. And that's why it happens sort of 1-2 weeks after that, right? After the end of the year, New Year, then it happens one. So we are concerned that if we continue in the same sort of current situation, we don't do something more, then this continued creep in the cases may end up with new super classes emerging that may be beyond our control later. So we are considering very carefully now whether additional measures may be necessary, and when we are ready, we will explain and highlight to the public what these new safeguards might be. But I think our mindset has to be that the measures are never static, right? We can tighten, it can relax, but it has to be based on the environment, based on the situation, and we are continuously monitoring it and making sort of adjustments as and when necessary.
Yi Jun, because she raised her hand a few times.
Hi, Yi Jun here from Xiamen. I have a few questions regarding upcoming Chinese New Year. Yeah, I just wanted to, because we understand that now currently like 8 person per group, right? So for this coming Chinese New Year for Bai Nian, does it mean that a household can receive like many groups of 8 people like per day? Is there any limitations on this number of groups? Yeah. For vaccination exercise, we're mentioning about like there's a lot of benefits about this vaccination exercise. Can you explain to us like what it looks like after the post vaccination days would be like? Yeah, thank you.
So the measures that I highlighted, like I said, we are anticipating, looking ahead, that you will have Chinese New Year coming up. There will be potentially a lot more intermingling, a lot more interactions, as has happened over the end of year when there's a festive period too. We saw a lot more interactions, and therefore we are considering now whether or not there might be additional restrictions and safeguards that might be necessary to keep the infection under control. Exactly what these are, whether they pertain to house visitations, what kind of measures, we are still studying, and when we are ready, we will highlight them. The second question on what a post-vaccination regime might look like, I presume you mean a few things. Number one, if I get vaccinated, will there be some benefits for me, right, as an individual who is vaccinated? So we have already said that we are studying this carefully. We are looking at the evidence around the extent to which vaccination helps to reduce transmission risk. We know it helps to protect the individual who is vaccinated from the severe effects of the disease, but we don't quite know the extent to which it reduces the risk of transmission of the virus to another person. So pending that information, I think we are unable to commit to any tangible, concrete benefits for vaccination at this stage. But if the data and evidence shows that transmission risks are reduced significantly, I think you can expect that somebody who wants to travel, you get vaccination, then potentially the the stay-home notice requirement can be reduced or perhaps even eliminated, depending on the evidence and the data. So that's one concrete sort of benefit. For workers who are subject to regular testing, we might then also similarly, because you are vaccinated, we might reduce the testing requirements. Right? That's another tangible benefit for those who are subject to regular testing. Then it doesn't have to be so onerous. You don't have to be tested so frequently. We can reduce the frequency or even do away with testing completely. That's a second benefit. Beyond the individual benefits, the question also would be, if the whole of Singapore, we have lots of people are getting vaccinated, then what kind of measures can we expect? Could we relax some of our existing safe management measures? And the answer is certainly yes. I think if at that stage, we could consider further relaxation, but again, the extent of the relaxation, what how far we can go would depend on the many questions we are asking about the effectiveness and the protective nature of the vaccine, which is still something we are studying very carefully. But in principle, if, for example, a vast majority of people in Singapore are vaccinated, and we have certainty that the vaccine does reduce transmission risks, does confer herd immunity, then yes, in principle, I think we can consider further relaxation in some of our safe management measures. So that's again, I think, additional motivation for all of us to want to step forward and get ourselves vaccinated when the invitation is extended to you.
Maybe polling.
I'm polling from Channel 8 News. My question is in Chinese. OK， 基本上就是因为今天刚才大家都有对那个接种疫苗很感兴趣，然后现在挪威那边其实也是有传出，就是有死亡病例，虽然它没有直接的关联，可是本地的年长者可能就会担心。那么在这方面，你们会如何的说服他们，或者是鼓励他们接种疫苗？那么当然也想请两位部长谈一下，就是过去的1年来领导这个工作小组辛苦的地方啊，挑战的地方，还有没有哪些领域是你觉得我们可以做得更好？如果可以的话，可以谈一下合力追踪的计划。当初如果可以重新再来，会不会更痛苦
？So answering Mandarin is going to be challenging.
Even for you.
Yeah. 我看这个好像刚才你所提出来的这个接种疫苗的死亡的这个新闻从挪威是吧传出来的这个新闻那最近昨天嘛还是前天挪威的专家已经澄清了跟这个疫苗没有直接的关系那么总而言之呢在新加坡当我们推出这个接种疫苗的时候我们都是采取一个非常谨慎的一个步骤。那么第一呢，这个在接种疫苗的中心那里会有医务人员会比较很详细的我们两个都经过那个经验，很详细的调查你的病历、你的过去的历史疾病历史等等你的健康历史。那么这样的话，他就能够比较有把握，能够这个确定你是不是适合接种这个疫苗。特别是对于老人家来讲我们的医务人员会特别关心，因为老人家毕竟年纪大了。但是同时呢，这个疫苗对老人家来讲，对年纪大的年长者来讲呢，是更加重要的。因为如果这些年长者一旦患上这个冠病病毒的话，他们的生命的危险就更加高了。所以疫苗对他们的这个保护力是更加重要的。那么所以我们还是会继续为他们接种疫苗，但是我们的医务人员会对这些已经有患病有比较年纪比较大的会格外的小心特别要观察他们，确保他们能够安全的接受这个接种。所以我请我们的年长者不必担心，我们都有这个预防的措施都已经实施了。那么至于这个合力追踪，那是 Lawrence
Yeah.
Okay, English.
English. Yeah, we reply English. Whether we can do anything better, right? There are certainly many things we can do better if you look back. When at the start of the year, when we was fighting this virus, there are so much uncertainty, so many things we didn't know about the virus. We didn't know about the asymptomatic nature of transmission. We didn't know how infectious it was. No one could tell that it would have caused the world to come to a standstill, travel to stop, borders to close. And some people at that time even predicted, don't worry, by June it will be all over because hot weather, everything will be over like SARS. So, it just means that there was a lot of unknown. And clearly, if we have a better picture, then we will have taken different measures. So I think there are certainly all things we can do better in a crisis like this. We will definitely encounter bumps along the road. Not everything we will get right. That's for sure. The key, as I've said before, is that we have to be quick to adapt, to adjust, to be nimble, put things right, recover from setbacks, and move forward. And that's the attitude we have. And at the end of the day, after all this is over, as we have promised, we will do a full review so that really to look at how our processes, our systems can be improved, because we know that there will be future pandemics. And just as we have learned from SARS, we have improved our system. After COVID-19, we want to learn from this experience to do even better and be better prepared for the next pandemic and for disease X in the future.
I think one lesson, following on Lauren's point, one important lesson we learned from this crisis, this pandemic, is that we must be prepared to adapt quite quickly. And we must assume that the unknowns are unknowns. Sometimes you don't know what are the unknowns. We think that we know because we have a lot of experience in the past, whether it's H1N1, SARS, and so on. So we have accumulated a lot of experience, and we think that we should do it this way because this is what we've done before, or this is what we did not do before. That's why we could have done better, and therefore this time we should do it this way. But it is not necessarily so, because the disease is quite different, and every outbreak is going to be different. Similarly, even as we do our review in time to come, there are many lessons that we learn. But one thing we have to bear in mind is that the next outbreak will again be very different from this one. If we just simply replicate what we do today, and assuming that we have already learned the lesson, and next time do exactly what we do what we would have done this time, I think the outcome will probably again be different. So I think we must always bear in mind that we need to be nimble, look for evidence, and sometimes you may need to make a few preemptive steps. One important characteristic of this virus that we did not expect in the beginning, one was what Lauren said is asymptomatic transmission. The second fact that we discovered was that actually it was infectious before it became symptomatic. So that makes it very difficult to prevent a transmission. Because if you're not symptomatic, it's very unlikely for you to go and see a doctor. And you are not likely to be to know that you are infectious. And in fact, by the time you become symptomatic, you go and look for a doctor, you have been infectious for a couple of days already. So if you remember, in the very beginning, we said that if you are unwell, you have symptoms of flu-like symptoms and so on, go back 5 days MC, and then if you still don't recover, come and see a doctor again. Then we'll test you. Then subsequently, we decided that that won't work because it may be asymptomatic. Secondly, even if symptomatic, it's already infectious 2 days before. And therefore, we now swap everyone that is symptomatic so as to catch them earlier. But again, even that is not enough, because by the time he's symptomatic and see the doctor, you already have 1 or 2 days that it's infectious. And therefore, even our contact tracing has to move backwards much longer so as to catch, detect more people who could have been exposed. So these are the things that we need to change as we go along. And as more evidence emerge, then we must learn very quickly and adapt our modus operandi very quickly to the reality on the ground.
Cheryl from CNA in front.
Good afternoon, Ministers. 2 questions. The first is regarding the rollout of vaccines. So beyond healthcare workers and seniors, I think many Singaporeans are also quite curious as to know when their turn will be. Are you able to provide more details in terms of what are the next steps beyond the seniors? Are we looking at a more progressive approach, or is it going to be really just a mass public opening for vaccines? The second question is, I know we talked about the benefits of being vaccinated. Are we also possibly looking at restrictions for the unvaccinated? And are we going to differentiate between those who are unvaccinated by choice and those who really, because of their health conditions or because they are pregnant, they really can't be vaccinated? Thank you.
First, we will roll out a vaccination program in line with the vaccines that we have received, as Wong has explained. We are not going to reserve some for you. If you decide not to be vaccinated, you wanted to wait, then whatever is available that we have will then be given to those who are the next in line, so that we will roll out as soon as possible. So even as we roll out the vaccination for healthcare workers, we haven't finished all the healthcare workers because they are taking a turn. There's a program for them. We have already started vaccinating some of the essential workers, airport workers and so on. As you know, they are exposed, and therefore it's important to vaccinate them first. So as you can see, we are not waiting for one program to finish before we start the next one. So we are progressively rolling out and expanding our vaccination scope and capacity. So I think in time to come, we will announce more details, because otherwise it gets very confusing if everybody starts to get schedules and so on, and start to make bookings. So we will progressively do so. When your turn comes, we will notify you and get you to go online to make a booking, and then your vaccination will then be done. And also remember that you still need to do the second dose in 21 days' time. So that is the second round that we will need to make sure that we have the stock to provide you with a second dose of vaccination. On the benefits and penalties.
Yeah, well, we've talked about benefits for the people who are vaccinated. I think you are now asking the other side whether there will be additional restrictions for people who do not get vaccinated for one reason or another. And I think the challenge there is we have to be quite careful, because it's not as though some people don't want to be vaccinated, but for perhaps medical reasons, it's not advisable for them to be vaccinated. And it's very hard to say, I differentiate between these two different categories, and as some, if it's you decided voluntarily not to be vaccinated, I have additional restrictions. And then, but you are not eligible, therefore the restrictions don't apply. So it's going to be quite complex, right? So I think for a start, where we are focused on is not so much restrictions, because there will be restrictions in place for everyone anyway, and that will continue for some time to come. Safe management measures, testing requirements, all of these safeguards and measures will be in place for everyone. But the potential benefit for someone who gets vaccinated is that there may be some relaxation of the prevailing restrictions, again, depending on the data and evidence.
Jeannie? Yeah, I think she's been.
Hi, Jeannie from Egg World. We have known that you have received the vaccination last week. So how do you feel now?
Feel perfectly fine.
That's why we are here.
We both had sore arms. Some soreness in the arm.
For about a day.
That's about a day, yeah.
I think that's quite common.
That's right.
Every time you do a jab, the next day will be a bit sore.
Kim Yong texted me, is your arm sore? I said, yeah, mine is quite sore. So we both had sore arm. That's all.
How will you rate your performance in leading the fight against COVID?
Is that a trick question?
No, I don't think it's for us. I mean, anyone can make a commentary on that, but I'd rather not focus on that at this stage. Like, as we said, the fight is still on. We are still in the midst of battle. After the battle is over, you want to look back and do all these evaluation, fine. But I think where we are still in the midst of battle, let's focus on what's the task at hand and address what the issues are.
I should say that in this fight, actually, there are no winners, because the key is how can we protect our people to the best of our ability, right? After all, there will be people who are infected. There will be people who passed on because of the disease. So actually, there are no winners. So we just need to make sure that we minimize the damage the infection has caused to our individuals, to our population, to the economy, and to our livelihood and lives. So I think we'll just continue to do the best we can, as much as we can, to protect Singapore and Singaporeans, rather than to give ourselves a score or ranking. I think focus must be do the best we can, as much as we can.
Ashley from Mothership.
Hi, Ashley from Mothership here. So I have two questions. The first one is, what do you think was the biggest obstacle you guys had to face in the past year while handling the COVID-19 crisis? Then the second one is something a bit more lighthearted. How has your impression of each other changed? Yeah, during the past year, during this whole crisis. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, the first question is biggest obstacle of? The biggest obstacle in our work, is it?
Biggest obstacle with regards to the whole pandemic that you guys faced during the pandemic in the past year. Yeah.
So my obstacle may be quite different from
Lawrence.
Go ahead. So in my mind, I think at least from a Ministry of Health and from my perspective, our biggest problem was we don't know the disease well enough. So in the beginning, we thought SARS is SARS. This coronavirus is very similar, but very quickly we found that they are not so. So there are many things that we did not know. We had a genetic sequencing quite early in the day. It was published, but even then we knew very little about the nature of the disease. So we have to keep adjusting our approach, keep adjusting our strategy, and keep moving. And it's not just Ministry of Health doing it, because as and when we need to change our approach, we need to move the entire whole of government machinery to implement these changes. And not even just the government machinery, we have to explain to people, we have to communicate with Singaporeans to let them understand why we are introducing these measures and why we need to do certain things that are not very popular, very tough, but we need to do that and bring people along. And PM have to go on the TV to persuade Singaporeans that we need to introduce these measures, and we need to go into a circuit breaker, and we have to announce DORSCON orange. So these are difficult decisions, but the unknown is a main worry that we have, and at the same time, communication is one of the biggest challenge that we are facing. In terms of Lawrence, personally, I discovered many things about him. First, he's very decisive when it comes to making decisions in MTF, because we don't sit next to each other because we have team A, team B. So we are in different rooms, but when we are in different rooms, I look at the way he discuss, raise issues, and make decisions. Once the facts are clear, he will no ifs and buts, just move and get it done. So I think I'm very happy to be working with him, and even enjoyable working with him with a very decisive co-chairman.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, obstacle, I would say, on top of what Kim Gan had said, the communicating to the public the necessity for the measures amidst this whole environment where it's so easy for people to get caught up in the latest mood, whatever that mood is extremely challenging. And we all know that the mood shifts quite quickly and is quite volatile. And we have seen that change over the past year alone. At the start of the year, when we entered this crisis, there was a bit more of a, clamoring, let's be very tight, right? And if we are very tight, maybe everything will be over in a month, right? There was a bit of that. And we had to tell people, no, look, this is a long fight. It's a marathon. And we have to whatever we do has to be sustainable. And our measures are based on data, based on evidence. And we will do what is necessary, but let's, look at the evidence carefully. As we got into October, when we had 0 cases, the mood was very different. The mood was, why don't we open up faster? Why are we still doing all these phase 2 measures? When can we get to phase 3? And we had to explain the opposite, that look, yes, we are doing okay, but the virus is still circulating. And if we were to relax too quickly, it's very easy for a resurgence of cases to come back. So that's how things shift so quickly and so easily, right? And this is not unique to Singapore. You see this everywhere in the world, right? But in that kind of environment where, you know, the public mood gets caught up very easily and very quickly, depending on the latest thing that gets viral, depending on the latest situation, the latest headline news, the latest count of cases, then how to maintain a steady course and how to make sure that whatever we do, yes, we certainly have to take into account public opinion and feedback, but it ultimately has to be based on scientific evidence, data, expert opinion, and then to explain that to the public and get support for the measures. I think that's to me one of the biggest challenges so far. This is on top, of course, of all the uncertainty we have to face with the unknown nature of the virus and all that, right? So on top of that, we have to also deal with this aspect of public communications. And it's a continuing challenge even today, right? So, and today it's, you know, based on the latest data, there will be a certain mood. 2 months later, it will be different. So you got to adjust to that, and we've got to continuously try and help people understand what we are doing, why whatever we are doing is necessary, is important, and get support for the measures. The second question, no, I've been fortunate. Somehow, I don't know why, I've been tied to Kim Yong in different ways, you know? Even before this COVID-19. I took over from him in PCF, right? He passed it to me quite early on when I entered politics as a PCF EXCO chair and then later on as chairman of PCF. I also took over from him as chairman of the Singapore Labour Foundation. So in many ways, he's been a great mentor because he has helped me to transit into these positions. He has guided me along in the transition of chairmanship in these 2 positions. And when I got asked to co-chair this task force with him, of course, it's been a very pleasant and good working relationship because it's built on a relationship we already have previously in these 2 organizations. And, you know, so since then, we've, of course, had many interactions. He's literally on my speed dial. I disturb him all the time because, after all, I'm coming in cold. I mean, he's MOH. I'm not MOH. I'm just helping him in the process. And so I take my role as sort of coming from a different perspective, sometimes challenging perhaps what the views of the professionals in MOH are asking questions. I can ask questions that are, if you will, out of the box, right? Because I'm not within the ministry, I can ask questions, I can brainstorm, I can throw up new ideas, and from time to time I'll just call him up, brainstorm, throw up ideas, and he's always open-minded, discussing, helping me to understand better what the science is, what MOH opinion is, and then together we've been able to sort of think through and brainstorm and come up with solutions together. Even in between MTF meetings, we have many regular conversations on an ongoing basis. So it's been a very productive and effective relationship.
Lynette?
Afternoon, Ministers. This is Lynette from the Straits Times. 2 questions from me. One, looking back. Which was the decision you felt most uncertain about making, or was that not an issue because, you know, as Min Gan said Min Wong's very decisive. And the second question is, you mentioned the light at the end of the tunnel, but at the same time, Q3 is very far away. So what do you see us living, working? What do you see that like 1 year from now?
Yeah, there are all these decisions that you never know, right? I mean, when we entered into a circuit breaker, there would have been people who said that's too drastic. There will be some who said, look, it is necessary. Why didn't you do more early on? It's a judgment call. So when we entered into a circuit breaker, we knew that this was going to be quite a drastic measure. There would be a significant impact on livelihoods, but importantly, it's also going to impact people's well-being. The vulnerable, the elderly, being stuck at home for a prolonged period, their mental well-being will be impacted. So it was a difficult decision to make, right? To weigh against the different considerations. How will it impact the vulnerable, the elderly, and on balance, will it do more harm than good, or will we be able to address effectively slow down the transmission? That was a very tough decision to make and a lot of uncertainty. But I think in the end, you can debate whether we did it early, could have done it earlier or could have been stricter, but I think the timing wasn't that far off in terms of when we had to do the circuit breaker. It was effective in indeed slowing down the transmission and enabling us to keep things under control. The opposite discussion happened when we were going to emerge out of circuit breaker. Then we were thinking, okay, we can relax. We have had 2 months of the circuit breaker, but how far to relax? And we had the discussion about, should we, for example, allow visitations? Remember, after we came out of the circuit breaker phase 1, we had allowance of 2 people per day, up to 2. We were initially unsure. What if we allowed and something happened? And we're talking about the elderly, and if we allowed something happen and the elderly, gets infected, the consequences may be quite severe. On the other hand, if you don't allow and people remain isolated, is that good for their well-being? So it's a very difficult judgment call, either way, right? It's extremely hard call to make. It's so easy to say, just be tight, right? But be tight for how long? Forever? For 1 year, everybody cannot see one another? I think we will go crazy. So what's the right balance, and how do you make these calibrations amidst great uncertainty? I think those were the tough calls we had to make. And eventually, as we emerged, we decided, initially we were thinking, let's be very tight and let's be very conservative. But again, after thinking through, after discussing with the medical experts and on looking at the overall picture, we thought maybe it's okay to allow some visitations, but with strict controls. And in the end, I think it turned out all right. So it will be the same kind of considerations we have to. This is almost deja vu, right? We are now in the new year, but it's not over. Yes, we have better tools. We have better testing abilities. We have better tracing capabilities. We have vaccination in place. But it's almost like we are back where we started 1 year ago. And we know that cases are around us. We have to think through all over again. What's the right calibration of measures? How far do we want to go in terms of the restrictions? With certainly the infection control is uppermost in our priority. We want to make sure we control the virus and keep it under control. But we also have to consider all these other factors, and the well-being of Singaporeans is at the top of our minds, and we have to make sure that whatever measures we put in place can be sustained, not just for 1 week, 1 month, but through a long stretch until everyone in Singapore, or the vast majority of people in Singapore, are vaccinated. So that's where we are now. The second question was about I think it's very hard to anticipate how things will be going forward. I would put it in sort of perhaps three broad time frames. In the immediate, from now till perhaps 1 year, maybe 1.5 years from now, I don't expect major changes, right? Yes, we can do a bit of easing and all that, but we will largely still be in the midst of a pandemic. Because even if the majority of people in Singapore are vaccinated, it's impossible for the world to be vaccinated by this year. Not at all. Which means that all around us, there will be countries where the virus may very well still be raging. End of the year, early next year, who knows, right? And so we will still largely be in this sort of pandemic mood, right? Over a 4-year time frame, 5 years, who knows exactly when, but at some point the pandemic will pass. Surely, no pandemic is forever. Either the world gets vaccinated and achieves herd immunity, or the virus attenuates and it's no longer as deadly, or something happens and the pandemic passes. How long that will take, I don't know, but it's not going to be within a year. If you say 4 or 5 years, perhaps. So over a 4-year period, I think there will be a gradual recovery of the economy, of our social norms. And it will take time, right? It will take time because the world will still be suffering from the effects socially, economically, psychologically of the pandemic. And this will be not a V-shaped recovery. It's not going to be a sharp rebound, but it will be a gradual process. And at some point, the world will emerge out of this pandemic. Beyond that time frame, then we have a new post-pandemic world, a new post-COVID world. What will this new post-COVID world be like? It's very hard to say. Will certain norms be changed? Will we stop shaking hands and have different kinds of greetings? Maybe, but who knows? We said this after SARS. Let's not shake hands anymore. But everyone reverted to shaking hands again, right? But maybe after a global pandemic like this, maybe habits will change. Will working from home become more permanent? I doubt it will be 100% as it is, or even 50%, but maybe some blend. What will be the new hybrid model? Again, it's very hard to tell, but I'm quite sure in this new post-COVID world, there will be some changes. Exactly what they are, I think it remains to be seen, and we just have to be prepared for it and gear ourselves to thrive and survive and excel in this new world.
Maybe I can just give a very quick take on to add on what Lawrence has mentioned. I think when no decisions are easy. So all the decisions we take we have to consider quite a lot of factors. Of course, the biggest decision was the circuit breaker and how we arrive at the timing of the circuit breaker. If you do it too soon, it's not going to be effective because after you lifted your circuit breaker, then everything else crops up, then you need to do it a second time. So we need to think about the timing. If you do it too late, it's also not going to help because you would already have a big cluster in your hands. Then it will take a long time to deal with that. So we need to time it, but we can never be perfect in timing. So we just have to have a sense, make a judgment. And that's why I said Lawrence very decisive. He said, we have to move. Then we just move. And we have to persuade the cabinet, persuade PM, say this is a time that we need to move, and we need to move in quite a decisive way. Because the worst is to have a half-measured circuit breaker. then we would have gone through the difficulty, but yet it's not going to be effective. So therefore, if you look back, you realize that circuit breaker was very tight. We had intended to bring the number of cases down to single digit, if you remember, during the press briefing on the circuit breaker. Even at that point in time, we knew that the decision to go into a circuit breaker is a difficult one, but how to emerge from circuit breaker is an even tougher one. So as you enter into circuit breaker, we talk about a three-phase opening to give a clear signal that actually it's not going to be a cliff, after the circuit breaker is celebration and free for all. It is going to be quite a long journey. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And I actually explained that phase 2 is going to be a protracted process of gradually turning on tap by tap and slowly to making sure that the infection doesn't blow up. And we have now reached phase 3. And phase 3, as Lawrence mentioned, 1 year, 1.5 years, the whole idea of phase 3 is to allow us to achieve a more or less sustainable, steady state situation while waiting for vaccine to be propagated, or for the world's infection to come down before we are able to revert more or less to the normal. That will take some time because it's not just Singapore, it's the rest of the world. So if you look at Singapore's infection number today may be low, but the rest of the world is still a very high number. So we will not be able to revert to normal unless the whole world has come down. So that's the nature of an infectious disease pandemic. So therefore, it's going to be a long haul. Important for us to roll out the vaccination. So what will happen after 1.5 years or 2 years? Again, it depends on what's happening to the rest of the world. So it's not so easy for us to just simply open up. Even after we have all been vaccinated, international traveling could still be challenging because other countries may not be opening. So if you want to travel, if there's nowhere for you to travel to, then you will have a problem. So in terms of international traveling is something that we will need to look at what the rest of the world is doing and what's happening in the overall global landscape before we are able to make major changes. But like Lawrence, I'm hoping that some of the positive changes that we have made in terms of public hygiene, personal hygiene, these habits, I hope they will last beyond just this pandemic. Because beyond the personal health issues, the next pandemic is not very far away. And Lawrence talked about 4 to 5 years before we can get out of this. I was thinking to myself, this is one point I may disagree with him. Because over the next 4 or 5 years, I'm quite sure the next pandemic will happen, right? So before we celebrate that, event finally COVID-19 is over, you have to always be vigilant that the next pandemic is just a short distance away. So we must always be ready that it could happen anytime. And therefore, some of these good habits that we have developed, we should try to maintain. Try to keep them so that it forms some form of a natural protection for ourselves. It's a bit like terrorism, if you think about it. Now, a lot of things that we do for counter-terrorism, we have more or less taken it for granted. You go to the airport, you have multiple checks. In the past, maybe 20 years ago, you just have one check before you board the plane, or something like that. And some airports don't even bother to check. But now, it seems quite normal for us to go through and just check, no problem. So I think in time to come, some of these precautionary measures may become the norm. And working from home, as Lawrence said, may not revert to may not remain as the default for forever. But I'm quite sure companies would have gotten used to this flexible arrangement and may not be the same as before. So it may not be 100% everybody go back to work. And a certain amount of flexible work arrangement, working from home, may become part of the norm in time to come. So I'm hoping that some of these, which are good from an infection control point of view, should continue, and we should continue to practice them. I'm not so sure about the handshaking, but we'll see how it evolves.
Yeah. We move to our final three questions in the interest of time. Irvina first from BH.
I just have two questions to ask. Firstly, looking back, what would you have done differently to avoid or mitigate the dramatic increase in the dorms around? Looking ahead at this stage now, what do you think was the greatest challenge in the month?
Well, so again, when you talk about looking back, what could we have done? I mean, we would have done what we are doing today in the dorms. We would be putting everyone on a sort of a regular testing regime. We would have taken far more measures than we had at that time, obviously. The challenge, of course, is if you were to think back at that time, did we have enough testing? It's one thing to say, I hope I can do it, but we didn't have the testing capabilities to test to the level that we have today. So it's also a question of one thing, you would like to do something, but do you have the ability to carry it out and to execute it? I always remember what, when we had a discussion in MTF, and from time to time, MTF briefs cabinet, right, on all the different measures. And every time we brief, there will be a range of different ideas and suggestions. And PM once told me, we can give you ideas, but in the end, you have to decide what can be executed, what can be implemented. Because we had limited test kits, we had limited resources in terms of manpower. Each time you deploy resource to a particular area, it means that you don't have resources to deploy to another area. So it's one thing to wish to do everything, but it's another to have the resources to execute and implement it well. Last year, we were in a different position. We didn't have all of the resources. We didn't know everything we know today about the virus. And that's why now we are in a stronger position. Our defenses are better. Our testing, our tracing capabilities are better. But better doesn't mean perfect. Better doesn't mean you will be 100% foolproof. And if you ask what's our vulnerability today, it is that, number one, despite all the precautions and safeguards we put in place, I think if that sense of complacency seeps in, if we start to let our guards down, not just in terms of the frontline work, but in terms of our social responses and behaviors as well, in terms of how people comply with the measures, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the requirements that we have put in place. If there is any lapse in any of these areas, then it will be very easy for new clusters to emerge, and we will be scrambling again, exactly like what we had to last year. So it's just a sober reminder that we constantly have to stay alert and vigilant.
Kang Wei, Wan Bao.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Kang Wei from the Zabao Wan Bao. Gary, I asked three very straightforward questions. Number one is, I think some of the point you have alluded to before, like, can we have maybe try to give a definite answer to Singaporeans that we are not expecting any opening of travelling and legal measures for next 1 year. Like, this is something that maybe we should prepare Singaporeans to accept this fact. Then number two is, I would like to ask, like, how much do you think that the MTF, when they make decision, all these different policy, like, how much does public opinion actually take into account? Because we actually talk a lot about, like, some of the people are getting very complacent, some people are getting like they might not be very in tune with all the safe distancing method because they thought that, it will be such a long time, the virus actually is not that great or what. But so there are always these different public opinion forces that are in work, and how much does it really affect the decision making of the MTF? And number three, I want to ask about more of an international question. Like, I think because recently there has been a lot of criticism about for some countries that like most of the vaccine have been acquired by rich countries, which we assume that they are, well, some of them might be referring to us because we already started a very successful vaccination program. But at the same time, we are also very committed to COVAX and all the international agreements about vaccines. So I want to ask like how whether Singapore position have changed of this and how we try to resolve some of the unhappiness or some of the criticism that might be leveraged on us because of our vaccination.
Okay, I answer the first two questions. On the first one about travel. First of all, actually, Singaporeans can travel anywhere in many places today, right? It's not as though you can't travel. Many places today do allow Singaporeans to go to their countries without even having to quarantine there. But so it's not as though it's restricted to travel. The thing is that when you come back, you have to serve a quarantine. That's the key deterrent to travel these days. So, the question therefore is, will vaccination, as has been asked many times, and then I think there's great hope by many people that vaccination will allow me to travel without a quarantine in the overseas country, and when I come back, I also don't have to serve a quarantine. If indeed that is possible, I think it will very soon allow. I can anticipate many people wanting to travel again, if indeed the vaccination confers that kind of a benefit. But as I said just now, we are not ready yet to make that kind of a claim or to make that kind of a move on vaccination. So we are continue to study the evidence, right? The broader point on travel, I think, even if we can do it in Singapore and it allows Singaporeans to travel more freely without quarantine, the broader point on travel is that even the IATA and all the international organizations have projected that air travel volumes will not recover to pre-COVID levels until sometime, I think it's 24 or something like that. Right? That hence my point about this not being the immediate 1-2 year, yes, it's where we talk about immediate sort of impact. But the whole recovery from the pandemic is not a 1 year issue. If you talk about the overall picture, the economic recovery, going back to pre-COVID in terms of air volume, it's not a 1 year affair. It's not even a 2 year affair. I think it's more like a 4 year affair, right? Before you see some of these industries recovering back to where they were before. So that's the picture for aviation and travel. And we have to be realistic that this is what it is, and it will have some impact on our own industry, particularly those that are reliant on aviation and tourism. On the second point about public sentiments, it's not so much that they influence our measures, but it's more that our measures take into cognizance the public health requirements. We consult the medical experts, the scientists. We look at the data evidence and we decide what needs to be done, first and foremost from a public health point of view. Having decided that, then yes, we have to take into consideration public sentiments in the communications. Right? And that's something that we constantly sort of grapple with. How do you communicate? How do you explain why we may not be able to move on something even though the public demands it, or why we may have to do certain things that may not be so readily acceptable or so readily understood. So the challenges are in that area rather than influencing what is necessary and the right thing to do from a public health point of view.
Okay, so maybe I just touch quickly on some of my views on the other two questions. On the international travel, as I mentioned, I think the key is it's not just us, not to depend on other countries. That's where you want to travel to. Therefore, my sense is we probably will be able to see bilateral arrangements for traveling to facilitate traveling between two places. We had a air bubble that was working out with Hong Kong, and we were not able to implement because of resurgence of cases. But it's one example that we probably could start on the limited travel, and eventually, if you have sufficient number of countries that have established bilateral arrangements, you may go into regional arrangements, allow travelers within countries who have mutual agreements. Then eventually, maybe you then open up to the rest of the world. So it's again, it's a bit like a circuit breaker. It's not going to be flip a switch and free for everybody to travel. So it's likely to be a progressive way, and we will look at how we can work with different countries to achieve that in time to come. On the public opinion, I agree with Lawrence. And actually, to some extent, our public's perception is important. The public understanding is important in our design of policies. Sometimes we need to ensure that our measures are simple, easy to understand, and don't create misperception. One example is dining together within a household. Technically speaking, actually within a household is the same risk factor. If you stay together for 10 of you stay together every day, then you go out to eat together, actually it doesn't really have higher risk. But at the same time, it's very difficult to enforce on the ground, very difficult to explain to the table next door that, oh, you're from the same family, same household. And how do you define? And it's very challenging for the waiters to have to check your IC to make sure that you stay together, you're not staying separately. And therefore, we have to go for measures that are easy to understand, easy to implement, and public can understand and accept the rationale. And ultimately, it's the spirit that we really want to protect you against the infection. It's not just about rules and regulations and how much to fine there. I remember someone asked me when we talk about the opening of a circuit breaker, we said 2 are we allowed to visit. And someone asked, if there are 3, are you going to fine them or jail them? So my explanation is that it's not about the fine and the jail, but it's about protecting you. So with that spirit, and then you can explain the rationale, and public will accept, and they will then internalize these rules, and they will observe, and they will understand why they need to do so. So I think public comms more than public opinion is very critical in our decision making, to keep it simple, easy to implement, easy to understand, and easy to enforce. The last issue about vaccine, as you pointed out, we participate in the COVAX facility, and we have also made a donation to COVAX facility to help the lower income countries to have access to vaccine. But for Singapore, we have placed orders for on a diversified portfolio, right? So we have sufficient supplies, vaccine supplies for the whole of population. But you must also bear in mind that many of these purchase agreements were what we call advanced purchase agreements, which means actually you make the purchase agreement before the vaccine has been developed. Otherwise, you will not be able to deliver to you. You will not have priority. So many of the vaccines, Pfizer, for example, that we have today is an advanced purchase agreement, was made before it was approved for use, before they developed the vaccine. And therefore, in order for us to make sure that we have sufficient vaccines, we will need to make advanced purchase agreements with multiple suppliers, because accepting the fact that not all of them will be successful. So therefore, we will need to ensure that our purchase agreements are diversified and we have sufficient quantities, and expecting that some of them may not materialize. And some of the suppliers whom we have entered into contract with may not be able to supply the quantity that we have contracted with. So therefore, we need to take a risk management approach, making sure that our purchase strategy, acquisition strategy on our vaccines is diversified, and we have multiple sources, we have a sufficient quantity to meet the needs.
Move on to the final question. Xi Ying from.
Good afternoon, ministers. 希望严部长可以用中文回答这个问题。Min Wong, you can take this in English. 部长想请问你们，就是经过回首1年啦，什么是让你们最难忘的？可以是一件事，或者是一个人，或者是一句话，为什么？谢谢。
哇，这个比较难的。
最难的问题是最后的问题。Always like that. Exam paper also like that.
This question I'll ask Lawrence to answer first.
Well, there are so many moments that are memorable. I don't know how to even begin. I beg your indulgence. I can't just pinpoint to one example, right? But I would highlight a few. I'll highlight a few. To me, for example, going to the community care facilities and seeing the great spirit and tremendous spirit of the people there rallying together, getting things done, even though, working so hard and within such a compressed time frame, but really that tremendous spirit of wanting to bring everything together. That was very inspiring. And it's, I can never forget how they rallied and contributed. And I've told them before, right? When you look back in sort of across different kinds of crisis and all that, there are always turning points in history, right? Pivotal moments. I think the ability of the whole team to come together and get the care facility up and running in such a short time, what they said, they made the impossible possible, was truly a turning point. If they had not done this, the trajectory of how of Singapore's trajectory through COVID-19 would have been quite different. So that, I think, was very remarkable for me. There was another incident I will remember, which is that just after I went into MOE and I visited a school and I, had a tremendous response from the students. And I saw how the students spontaneously, over the past few months had been writing thank you letters to frontline workers, to migrant workers, to appreciate the contributions of our essential workforce. And that was very heartening too, because it showed that, the Singaporeans appreciate better from this crisis the work of our essential workforce, that, the jobs they do, and hopefully emerging from this crisis, we will be able to become a more inclusive, more gracious society because of that there's a greater appreciation for the important contributions that these people make, and we will have a greater sense of respect for the work that they do. And then the students themselves surprised me with, they were doing this exercise where they were writing to their future selves about how they have experienced COVID-19, how they have experienced the circuit breaker, learning from home, and how their thoughts and feelings. And many of them wrote about how they became more independent, they matured from this, they learned to be more appreciative, they learned that they were grateful for the environment that they were in, to be able to continue schooling, continue studying, and they thanked all the different people who helped in that process. And I thought that was it was very heartening to see the students reacting in this way. And I was told, yes, I visited one school, but I was told many students across all our schools were going through a similar exercise in a way, spontaneously, very often, expressing their gratitude, appreciation, and also importantly, reflecting on what they had gone through this whole period that is really quite a remarkable period in human history. And I think for our students to go through that, to reflect on that, and to emerge stronger, more resilient, more adaptable, and in a way more a stronger sense of solidarity as Singaporeans, I think that would put us in a much stronger footing as we think about how we can build a better Singapore in the years ahead.
Very good answer. Well, 其实我刚才想到要讲的也跟他一样呢，这个是很麻烦的事情。因为我在回想的时候，我就想到这个社区护理中心，是吗 ？Community Care Facility。当我第一次去参观他们的设立的这个社区护理中心，那时候还没有病人，还在筹备当中。我就看到说，哇，这个地方很大，Singapore Expo 的这地方很大，一共可以装得下450个，一个 hall 450个左右。那么我就说，哇，这个 hall 这么大，一定够用吧？不过后来我们就发现其实不够用。到最后我们一共超过1万个差不多1万个床位。就在 Singapore Expo 本身，差不多9000多1万个床位，然后到又到樟宜的这个Exhibition Hall、Exhibition Center， 那边又有新的Care Facility 等等。其实我感到最惊讶的就是他们在短短的几天之内就把这个设备建立起来，不单只是硬件的建设，他们也要发动他们的医务人员，那么Resorts World 也要带动他们的服务员来负责其他的服务的其他的服务，那么医务人员要为那里的病人提供那些医疗的服务，所以我们有很多个不同的单位，有政府的单位，有私人的单位，有医疗单位。都能够无间的合作，在这么短的时间里面就能够发起这样的一个项目，这个对我们来讲是一个非常重要的一个转捩点，因为在那个时候呢，我们可以看到我们的这个工人宿舍的案例一直在直线的上升，那么医院的病房就会感到压力。如果医院的病房不够用的话，就会跟很多的国家一样，没有办法照顾得好那些病重的病人，所以我们需要尽快的找一个地方，让这些病情比较轻的能够好好的休养疗养就可以了。那么医院的病房要留给那些比较病重的病人。那么去哪里找呢？我们就想这些地方，但是需要花很多时间去建立这个设施，但是我们很欣慰的就是能够在这么短的时间里面就把这个设备建立起来，而且在很短的时间里面就把它的容量扩大到9000个单位，这个是非常不容易的，也看到我们的不同的单位能够在紧急的时候，在有危机的时候能够合作，能够落实这样的一个计划，这是一个非常令我感到非常欣慰的。那么第二呢，我需要解释说，虽然这个记者招待会都是黄部长跟我来主持，但是其实我们的团队有一个非常庞大的这个政府官员他们的都是非常优秀的官员，因为我们做决定就是做决定了，但是真正要落实这些计划呢，是我们的政府官员日以继夜废寝忘食的去 去落实这些计划，因为有很多很多的细节需要去处理的。单单我们的这个边境的管理可能很容易说 OK， 今天我们停止了，不许这个国家来，或者是这个国家来需要经过检测不过我们要记得，不同的国家有不同的边境管理的条例。那么在我们的机场边境的管理人员还要留意不同的国家从哪里来，往哪里去，不同的到达的旅客要通过怎么样的管道，怎么样的次序同时还要保护自己等等，这些都是非常非常复杂的操作。那么我们的官员呢，都需要每个细节小心的去处理以防为了要防止这个疾病的传染。所以这些细节都是我们非常优秀的政府官员一步一步的来落实。所以我还是要在这里谢谢我们的政府官员们的合作跟支持，让我们这个跨部门的工作小组能够落实这许许多多非常复杂的这些政策跟计划。